Welcome to a special episode of Star Warsologies. We're here at San Diego Comic-Con at home and with a very special Science of Star Wars panel. I'm one of your hosts for the panel, James Floyd.
And I'm Melissa Miller, and we are co-hosts of the podcast Star Warsologies, which is a great podcast for Star Wars fans who are looking to connect real world science, technology, and other fields of study to the galaxy far, far away.
We have a really cool panel for our show this time. Normally we just interview one guest expert, but for this panel, we have 3 scientists and a concept artist. Tell us more about them, Melissa.
We've got Jim Lehane, who's a geologist and paleontologist, Lisa Will, who's an astronomer, and also Angela Zaumplis, who's a polar biologist. And then as a very special guest, we have Jake Lunt Davis, who is a concept artist who worked on all the sequel trilogy as well as Rogue One and Solo to share his behind the scenes info and some really great concept art. I really liked recording this episode where we had multiple scientists all chatting because there really is that connection between physics, biology, astronomy, and so much more. And then also hearing from our concept artist about all of the cool ways that science was thought about or not thought about in the design of, and then also brought to screen in Star Wars.
And we'd like to thank the Fleet Science Center for helping sponsor this and get it on the Comic-Con program.
They do a great science of pop culture panel pretty much every year at Comic-Con, and Comic-Con at home has not been any exception. So thanks to them. And we really hope you enjoy this episode. Without further ado, let's get to it.
Yay, Comic-Con!
Woo, Comic-Con!
Welcome, everybody. We're so excited. My name is Andrea Decker, and I have the pleasure of representing the Fleet Science Center, the Science Museum in San Diego. I hope you know about us. If not, I hope you're going to check us out after seeing this wonderful panel. Every year at Comic-Con, the Fleet Science Center hosts panel discussions about the intersection of science and pop culture, because there is a lot, whether it is how can Superman fly, or we're looking at science fiction like we're doing today, because science fiction is only science fiction until science figures it out, and then it's not fiction anymore. So we're quite excited to have a wonderful panel. And the reason we're here today is actually through the help of Melissa Miller and James Floyd. They have a podcast that's called Star Warsologies, and they're leading through our panel today, which is called The Science of Star Wars. Woo-hoo. All right, Melissa and James, why don't you take it away for us?
Thanks, Andrea, and thanks to the Fleet for hosting us. As she said, this is the Science of Star Wars panel, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask all of our guests to introduce themselves, tell us briefly about their expertise in science and in Star Wars, and then maybe what your professional geek out moment is in Star Wars. Something that really excites you because it's connected to your field. I'll start off with myself. My name is Melissa Miller. I'm trained as a biologist and ecologist, worked as a chemist, now a science communicator. So a lot of overlap. But my favorite thing about Star Wars and what really got me connected professionally is the porgs from The Last Jedi. Did a lot of bird watching as a kid, and so to see the porgs in their natural environment there, somewhat bird, somewhat seal, was really exciting to me and something that I love seeing. James?
Sure. I'm James Floyd. I am the co-host of Star Warsologies along with Melissa. I'm trained as a transportation planner, but I've been loving Star Wars ever since I was a kid, and I am really excited to see all kinds of things happen today. Probably one of my biggest geek out moments as a transportation planner is looking at the speeder chase on Coruscant in Attack of the Clones as they're going through multiple levels, and just wondering, how do they keep all that traffic directed and, not crashing into each other? I'll turn it over to Angela.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm a grad student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where I study polar biology and just general environments that approach the near limits of life. So, of course, Star Wars is fascinating for me. Geek out moment. Of course, I go to Antarctica a lot. And so seeing Hoth, the ice world, and knowing that it supports life like the Tauntauns, and trying to figure out that little ecosystem has always been really cool. But yeah.
Great. Thanks. And Lisa?
Hi, I'm a professor of physics and astronomy at San Diego City College, and I am the resident astronomer at the Fleet Science Center here in San Diego. And one of my geek out moments actually occurred during Star Wars Rebels, an episode called Path of the Jedi, when our heroes Kanan and Ezra are going to the Jedi temple on the planet Lothal, and we see Aurora in the sky above them. And suddenly I knew that Lothal has a magnetic field. And I could even tell that its atmosphere isn't the same as the Earth's because the Aurora glowed different colors. So that was kind of cool.
Awesome. Okay, Jake.
Hi, my name is Jake. I am a concept designer. I worked on all the sequels and the spin-off movies designing aliens, creatures, and droids. And my biggest geek out moment is working on Star Wars. I mean, it was a ambition come true. It's exactly what I wanted to do when I was a 13-year-old, 12-year-old kid, and I got to do it. So I'm finding myself there doing it, geeking out big time.
And one of the cool things about doing Comic-Con at home is we can bring in guests from all over the world. Jake is joining us from the UK.
Yes.
And our final guest is joining us from somewhere in the middle of America. Jim, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm a geologist and paleontologist, and I actually I have a huge fascination with geology and pop culture and paleontology and pop culture. And so I write for a couple of websites, mostly of mine. Anytime I see geology and paleontology in like national parks or in the movies or something, I'll typically write up about it, where the background behind it, or even like wine. I'll write about like where did the geology and paleontology come from, a wine label, and that sort of thing. And I guess my biggest geek out moment was during The Last Jedi. I was sitting and Gareth Edwards kind of licks the ground and says, this is salt. And if you notice, the whole planet is basically, other than covered in a thin layer of white, the whole planet is red. And there is a type of salt that is red. And as a geologist, you kind of learn a bunch of different minerals, and it's one of the lesser known minerals of sylvite that's related to salt. It's a potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. And it is a bright red color, similar to what you see on Crait. And so that was my geek out moment. I got so excited when I saw that I immediately wrote up a whole post for AAPT Comics about it.
Does it taste the same?
It's a little bitter, actually. It's so it does have that salt tinge to it, but it's definitely a unique taste.
I feel like that's the only time we've ever seen science being done, like as a process, because they're like, oh, I looked at this, and what are you going to do? You're going to taste it. Because when I saw in the trailers that red dust getting kicked up by the speeders, I immediately went, I think that's salt. And so I was actually kind of excited to see that acknowledged. But the variety of worlds that we see in Star Wars, and how they're reflected in analogs in our solar system, that is always something I have found really interesting. I don't know if you want me to go on more about that now, or if you want to.
Yeah, go for it.
One of the criticisms we often hear of the worlds in Star Wars are that, like, there's too many monoclimates, like the ice world of Hoth or the forest moon of Endor. But in our solar system, we do see monoclimates. We see icy moons, like Enceladus of Saturn and Europa of Jupiter. And they do exist if they're small enough. And so the problem with them, then, with people being able to function on them, is that when we see monoclimates in our own solar system, the gravity would be too low. The likelihood of them being able to sustain an atmosphere. So that's where the difficulties come in. It's not that they can't exist, though.
So in relation to what you were saying, geologists do have a tendency to taste, or at least stick on their tongue or their teeth, a lot of what they're sampling, just because your tongue and your teeth are so sensitive to things that we like to lick rocks a lot.
And sniff meteorites, because meteorites smell like metal because they have more iron in them.
Wow.
That could just be me.
Say, as a chemist, we were very specifically told not to taste or smell anything. So
same with biology for the most part. You don't want to lick those microbes.
So Angela, tell us a little bit about your background photo, maybe, and what exploring life in Antarctica can tell us about life in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah. So my background photo is this place at Lake Frixel, which is just a permanently ice covered lake in Antarctica. It's gorgeous, but also underneath this lake ice, we find a bunch of cyanobacteria and whole little ecosystems, micro ecosystems. But yeah, it surprises me. I'm more surprised with when you find a place that life can't survive, right? Going to all these extreme environments and seeing how robust life is and all these crazy adaptations makes you think really that, can life exist, in icy places outside of Earth or on all these potentially habitable worlds. And, there's very good possibilities with what we're learning, in extreme places.
So I've been to Hoth, or rather Finse, Norway, where they filmed the Hoth scenes for The Empire Strikes Back. Do you think there's a possibility that the Tauntauns and Wampas really could exist on a planet that doesn't seem to have much in the way of lower food chain items?
Right. So that's, the Tauntauns are pretty, big, complex life for these environments, right? But I like how they related it back. They said that the Tauntauns eat the ice algae, which is really cool to know that there's ice algae, right? So they've kind of related it back to these things. And ice algae support themselves with antifreeze proteins, right? So they lower the freezing point of ice, and they can live in little brines and areas. Whether that's enough to sustain big, mammal-like creatures, who knows? But still that possibility. Tauntauns are really special, though. Yeah.
Did anyone glean any information from when the stomach was cut open? No one froze the frame and just tried to analyze what they could of those internal organs.
We should get a I can't say it, a GI specialist to get into the guts of the matter here.
Or a barbecue specialist.
Yeah,
that was one of my favorite scenes. I love that bit.
Yeah, it's definitely a memorable one from my childhood as well. And I know that someone has done the science of could you then survive overnight in an animal, and I think that checks out. Luke would be fine. Han maybe had to get in there with him. We're not sure.
He got in the tent. He just put Luke in the Tauntaun long enough to put up the tent.
There you go.
It's weird that NSF doesn't issue standard mammals that you can tents. What are these tents? Why don't we have?
Well, eventually the Tauntaun would cool off after a couple days, and then your tent would be a little more useful. Although if you had a heater for your tent built on the ice, I would think that maybe you'd start to sink as the water below your tent slowly melted.
Yeah, interesting. Could have been a totally different movie. So, Angela, I know that you study bacteria and that there's a lot of real life ones that have been discovered that could explain some of the things in Star Wars, but that they were discovered after the various movies came out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a couple really cool scenes in Star Wars, right? One I'll always bring back is the Minox, the electricity eating Minox. We don't necessarily find, again, these big complex forms of life that eat electricity, but bacteria, yeah, they do. So sometime during or right after that movie, they found these bacteria that get their energy directly from, electricity. They don't need any intermediate substances, just they take up electricity and that provides it with energy. So that's crazy. But yeah, so much of our, the fascinating things and things that could, like that we look at to Star Wars is like, wow, that's really cool. Most things happen in these little microbes, and for example, the mito or midichlorians. So it's called, yeah. Right? I mean, that whole theory of endosymbiosis goes back there where you have, some bacteria that transfers some really cool ability. Will we ever see bacteria that can give us properties of the Force? Maybe not, but certainly they transfer a lot of cool, properties and neat adaptations.
You were mentioning that after after the movies came out that they found that bacteria. It's similar to the binary star systems. I'm sure Lisa knows better than I do how they had found planets with binary stars after the movies had come out, because people kept saying that it wasn't possible until that they were discovered.
Yeah, and now we know there's actually there's about 24 confirmed exoplanets now that we know are in binary systems.
Wow!
And so they're probably even more common than that. That's just what we've found so far using things like the Kepler data from the Kepler telescope and so on.
Is that only information? Is that only data and knowledge that you've only found out in the last 40 years? Then, because I assume that was just like. People knew that. I thought it was science.
We knew there were binary star systems, but the discovery of exoplanets, the fact that other solar systems exist, have been within the last couple of decades. So definitely since Star Wars in '77.
Okay, cool.
We talked about this a little bit with Jim in our Star Warsologies episode about, the desert planet of Tatooine, and is that for this reason or that reason, and the presence of water. And then I think we talked for 45 minutes before we realized there's two suns. Maybe it's just hot and the desert is all you get. So maybe, Lisa, do you have more insight into that?
Well, the two stars in the Tatooine system, that's Tattoo 1 and Tattoo 2, I believe they're called. They're in the Star Wars lore as G stars, which means they are stars like our own sun. And so if you have two of them and you're in close proximity, yeah, it's going to be a little bit warmer than you might expect here. But in binary star systems, there's a variety of options that you can have. And so it looks like Tatooine is fairly close to its star, so it's just hotter because it's close to two stars like our sun. But there can be all sorts of different things that come in depending on their distance from the star. You're going to get different levels of solar radiation, especially if the two stars are widely different from each other. Whether or not the two stars are close to each other or widely spaced from each other is going to determine what sort of orbits you can have and be stable. It's just going to, there's all sorts of possibilities, but Tatooine actually is one of those possibilities.
So maybe the reason that Jawas and Tusken Raiders cover up is because of that extra radiation they're getting from two suns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as the native creature characters there, they would know what's up more than the humans. So
we also don't know Tatooine's atmosphere, because our atmosphere filters out most of our radiation from the sun. So their atmosphere could be differently filtering out their radiation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a new level of overthinking things in terms of how do they all go back and forth between these very different planets and radiation and atmosphere, and how do they breathe? But you just got to wave away. And Jake probably wants us not to think too hard about things like that. But I am curious.
No, I think it's worth thinking. I think even for as a watching it, even without working on it, I think even, as a viewer, I've always thought, I suppose, it's very handy, isn't it? Everyone can just rock up to any old planet. I think it's sci-fi in general, Star Trek included. You can rock up to a planet and it's got the same gravity, a breathable atmosphere. You're generally okay. I think humans seem to be okay. It's a lot of other aliens which seem to need some kind of breathing tubes. There's a lot of aliens that we do that have, they don't seem to be able to breathe the same atmosphere and have little tube and masks, but humans are generally fine.
Yeah.
I think
it's a consideration.
I think the asteroid is really the only time we really see them put on a breathing mask.
And then on Polis Massa at the very end of Revenge of the Sith, where Padme goes to give birth, we actually see an asteroid that has no atmosphere, and you see little spacemen in suits outside, but then they move inside to the hospital area.
Okay. So Jake, is that a fun thing for you to design, the different adaptations for characters to go back and forth between planets?
Yeah, it's always a great addition. It's they always come up with multiple cool looking, tanks and tubes, and it can also be practical. You don't have to do a mouth, It doesn't. As soon as you cover up, then it's just from a practical point of view. You don't have to do mechanics and animatronics, or it can just make a cool voice, and maybe you've got some lights flashing. So yeah, there are practical advantages as well.
Yeah.
They look cool and are practically useful.
And when you design critters, animals for different environments, do you factor that in as well? You know, the desert planet versus a forest planet.
I don't know. Off the top of my head, there are probably things which don't add up. There are probably things you look at and go, "How that would just someone scientific is probably going to blow me out the water." No.
What about the steel pecker?
Well, the steel pecker, was. I think the steel pecker is kind of adapted to its environment, because that environment is now a kind of graveyard for spaceships, and the steel pecker is adapted to that environment and now consumes the metal. Whether it did initially, it must have had some. I don't know, but it's now all about its diet is metal and oil and minerals.
And the steel pecker is the bird, one of the birds we see pecking at the wreckage on Jakku in The Force Awakens. So
there's a brief
just a reminder of that.
As Rey is, I think you very early scene within minutes. I think Rey, you meet Rey, and then she drives back to the village. And the camera just tracks off this bird, quite a big full frame, and it's there pecking away. I believe Steven Spielberg actually came up with the idea initially and suggested it to JJ that it would be quite cool to have a bird eating metal. That was it. That's the brief. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I guess while we're talking, sorry, go ahead.
Go on, you say.
No, I was just going to say, while we were talking about that scene, I know you also designed Rey's speeder, and I'm curious about the process that went into that and how much of her character notes, influenced how you designed that.
I mean, I know that Rey's speeder, we were fortunate. I always would say that, I was meant to be doing, our department did creatures, and the art department were meant to be doing all the things like vehicles. We didn't normally touch vehicles, but there was a little bit of a crossover, and we were given the opportunity to do that. Because I don't know, the production designers weren't feeling they were kind of getting it. And they said, come on, have a go. Because we did BB-8 and we were doing droids, so it was mechanical. And I think I was just looking, did I draw on her? I knew I had to carry things, which in the end it didn't really do. There were various other ideas I did that had like areas to carry her salvage and things like that. But I wanted it, I was just finding it, as ever, a cool shape, and it's this big square block. And also I just wanted to look quite agricultural. I mean, it is essentially, you put some wheels on it, it would be a tractor. It has a sort of industrial, with four wheels, and it would be an old school, those old fashioned 1940s tractors. So there is a sort of industrial utilitarian factor to it. At the same time, it also is influenced a little bit by those 1930s race cars, those long, thin ones. Again, we've just put four wheels on it. It's a combination of that. They're a little bit speedier than tractors. It didn't want to look as boringly slow as a tractor. But yeah, I just felt it, wanted to look a bit sort of utilitarian and useful as what it was about. Not flashy and, I think Luke's kind of got a slightly more of a hot rod, I think, whereas she hasn't. She's got a workhorse.
Well, that's a really good way to kind of get their personalities across through their vehicle. Angela, we talked a little bit about the midichlorians at the small end of things. At the giant ends of things, there is the gigafauna, the Summa verminoth that we see in Solo in the maelstrom around Kessel, the giant space jellyfish squid thing. How could such a creature like that exist?
Right. So I was reading a little bit about their diet, right? And it said that they rely a lot off of gases, right, for their energy, or like charged gases, which is cool. And then eventually, when they have opportunity, probably ships and other things like that, right? But yeah, that's already interesting. Again, from our perspective, we know that there are a lot of microbes that a lot of things survive off of the sun's energy, or for us humans and animals, we survive off of eating things, right? But there are microbes that don't need the sun, don't need food, but rely off of gases for their energy. So that's already a little cool aspect of that. And then also, it seems like, something so gigantic probably hibernates a bit, right? So even when they come across it, it's sleeping, which is probably something it does often. And then when they wake it up, it's very grumpy and finds a nice opportunistic snack, right?
So moral of the story is, if you see something like a sleeping dragon, let it be.
Sleep. Let it sleep. Yes.
Speaking about Kessel, Lisa, the Maw cluster environment, that kind of nebula plus that's around Kessel surrounding the planet, could you have a real planet with a real sun inside something like that?
So what's interesting to me about that environment, first of all, it's extremely dense. You've got large chunks of debris in that system. You have a lot of gases, and nebulae look dense to us, but that's because they're so huge. The densest nebulae in space is still emptier than the best vacuums we create here on Earth. And so that sort of environment, when I look at it, if I'm in my head trying to make it make sense, like what physically could have caused that looks like something to me that got destroyed. And so having a planet safely remain within that environment when something that big around it got destroyed, that's maybe it got bombarded a lot. Maybe it's that density that's shielding it from the radiation from the Maw cluster that's nearby, right? And so there's all sorts of interesting stuff going on there, and that you can try to make sense of. But being surrounded by so much debris, it makes me think that Kessel might get hit a lot.
Well, that's probably really bad for the spice miners there, but probably really good for the mining operations. It's like, hey, we need to open up a new vein. Okay, we'll just wait for something to hit this spot, and then we can just start digging right through the crater. Not exactly a precise mining science. I wouldn't recommend it. So Jake, you already kind of touched on this, like how animals and technology could be adapted to different worlds. I don't know, anything more about some of the other planets that we see that you might just speculate about, or maybe some of the planets that you got to work on? I don't know, about porgs, since, that's one of Melissa's favorites.
Porgs. We do like talking about porgs. Yeah, I did design the porgs as well, which is was good, good fun. Very quickly, I have said this several times. The porgs kind of only existed initially as a kind of a cover-up, because the island that they shot on, in reality, was a sort of national, it's a protected wildlife reserve with all these puffins that live there, and you see a lot of those puffins. They're just in a lot of the wide shots. You can see the birds wheeling around, and I think when they were there, they thought they might, catch a few in the background, in the deep background. And I think Ryan's solution to sort of was to, work with that and kind of include, he thought, it'd be cool to have some, he didn't want to get rid of them. They couldn't physically get rid of them. And then digitally, it was just a bit of a pain. And they thought, well, let's just, introduce our own wildlife. So he wanted to come up with, the brief was, I need something vaguely puffin sized, about this big, that we can just plonk anywhere we want in the background, and it will then justify the existence of all the other ones that you might see in the wide shots, which is, I thought, quite a positive way of dealing with a problem, I think. And so, the brief was come up with something that was puffin-like, really, and I very quickly, it didn't take very long either. Within about a day, I sort of done a various bunch of sketches, and he picked the one that, was drawn towards this thing, which it was basically a mixture. Initially, it wasn't feathered. I was thinking it was going to be more like a seal or a penguin, that it would dive a lot more underwater. So that my little sketches had got sort of seal fur and webbed, like skin, I suppose like a bat or something like that, or a seal. No, like seal flippers or something with, an expanse of skin. I hadn't really got that far. and it had little flippers or webbed fingers, but it would then have dived in and caught fish. It still, I think, would have done that. In my mind, that's how it hunts. Like I can't think of a sea, like a tern or something, like seagulls, whatever. They would, but it became feathered, and it's this combination of, it's a mammalian / bird. I mean, it's like nothing else. It's got a slightly dog pug-like face. And,
so can you can you answer a debate whether Chewie plucked the porg or skinned the porg?
Is there a debate? I don't know. What the word is now?
No,
Would you have to pluck it full stop, wouldn't you? I don't know. I'm not a big hunter. Wouldn't plucking, or can you just catch a bird and skin it without plucking it? Is that doable?
I think you would have to pluck it. This got very
plucking. I thought all birds needed plucking. You don't skin them like rabbits, do you?
Right.
I don't know. I'm not the best, I live in London and I'm not not really a hunting, fishing kind of guy, I'm afraid to say. So I can't answer that question. I think he plucked it.
Yeah. Well, either way, it did look delicious, I have to admit. As much as I love pork, that roasted one looked pretty good. So,
can I just go off piste a little bit with the pork business? So in terms of eating things, in The Mandalorian, there's a shot where I can't remember the name. Who's Jabba's little?
Oh, the Kowakian monkey lizard, Salacious Crumb from Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. So in The Mandalorian, there's a bit where it tracks past a roasting spit roast of one of those things. I don't know. To me, I don't have anything to do with The Mandalorian. Is that stepping over a line?
I certainly thought so. When I saw that was really hard because that is a sentient creature. We see it the Jedi. It understands jokes. It communicates. And to see the one watching the one being roasted in The Mandalorian was honestly, for me, pretty horrifying.
Yeah.
Also, they're kind of bony. Like, they don't look tasty.
No, but it is, I don't know. It wasn't, because as I say, it's a sentient thing. And suddenly it's like, I don't know.
Well, you think about the Ewoks, and they were going to eat Luke and Han and Chewie, and
true.
They didn't even seem like they wanted to shave Chewie first to get the fur off. But I guess they're just going to cook all that hair off. But I guess different cultures have different opinions on eating sentience.
Yeah.
Well, this took quite a turn.
Maybe
next year, the cooking of Star Wars. What was that, Jim?
Maybe the Ewoks don't consider us sentient.
Yeah.
That's a deeper question.
Maybe. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction now. Getting away from the cooking and food direction. I would like to know, so we had a little conversation before we started the recording. Jake, when you design something, you got to go by brief, and then you probably think about, what would look cool, and you might get your inspiration from the outside world, like a tractor or a cool bike you see. And so I'd like to learn a little bit about that. But the conversation we had before we started recording was about science and how science is done, right? So Jay gets his inspiration from saying, oh man, I know something cool that might work, and I'm going to design this based on this thing that I've seen. So when you do your scientist, do you ever watch a movie like Star Wars and you're like, oh my God, this is so cool, we should research this? Does that ever happen, or do you know of it maybe?
Something like Star Wars is what I think people resonates with the audience about Star Wars and makes it believable, is because there's elements in it, I think, which draw so much on terrestrial things that you recognize, whether it's technology or natural history or science. Like, say, for instance, the Tauntauns, I'm just going to pick that out. It's totally believable because you sort of think, well, it looks like something that could exist on this planet. It's not the most outlandish, insane alien creature ever designed. You could go nuts and and create something that's really alien, but it would be very hard for you to sort of take it in. Whereas the Tauntaun just mashes up things that you recognize, like a kangaroo and a sheep, and puts them all together. You sort of think, wow, that could exist. And likewise, a lot of the spaceships have a sort of, they draw so much on existing technology, but can tweak it a little bit that you think, well, it's all believable. So yeah, subconsciously or consciously, we're not necessarily all sitting there going, this is the science we want to apply, but we're all savvy enough about natural history and science and to sort of be influenced and inspired by it. And I think that's ultimately then what you, the audience, us, the audience, I mean, I'm the audience as well, enjoy about it and make it sort of think, wow, it's totally believable.
Yeah, I can see that after one or two David Attenborough nature documentaries, you would have a whole new slew of ideas. And I remember talking with you separately, Jake, about fish when you had to design fish for Acto.
No, fish. I've said this again before. Fish are the worst because fish are just alien. And not just fish, not fish, but sea life is so alien, and they keep coming up with they keep discovering new ones. They'll go down some trench and go onto the bottom and they go, oh, wow, we've discovered this amazing little sort of octopus or squid thing. And you thought, oh, that's like nothing. That could be one of these giga, you blow it up to something, like one of these gigafauna you've talked about in the Kessel Run, job done. It'd be totally believable as an alien. So when I've had to design some fish, like when Luke's got some fish slung over his shoulder in The Last Jedi, and I had to design some fish, and the caretakers cut some up. And it's just so hard to design something that didn't look like it had been fished out of the sea on a science program already. I even got this the other day. I was watching that Octopus Teacher documentary. It was even then I was watching that going, aliens. So yeah, they're very hard.
I was going to say we managed to bring it back to eating things with that fish that the caretakers were cutting. But anyway, Andrea, go back.
I was going to say, Jim, what research was that you've done might have been inspired by Star Wars and pop culture? And if any of the other scientists want to jump in.
I'm not sure anything I've done specifically, but I have a paper that I wrote did definitely reference Return of the Jedi in a scientific paper. I had done research. A lot of the work I've done is on trace fossils, which are the remains that animals leave behind, footprints, burrows, that sort of thing. And I wrote a whole paper on what are called trapping traces, where an animal is not actually catching an item, but leaving a trap or forming a trap that its prey will fall into or be like trapped, like a spider web or what's called an antlion burrow, where an antlion will actually bury itself into the sand and have a kind of like a funnel of sand above it, where a smaller animal will fall into that pit, very similar to the Sarlacc pit on Return of the Jedi. And so the reviewers, one of the reviewers, as any scientist know, reviewer number 2, said that I don't need to put that reference there. And both my co-author and I fought back and said, no, this is like the perfect prime example of to get this concept out into the world, like what people would understand.
So you're basically just saying it's a trap.
Yes.
We knew we'd get that one in there somewhere. So Lisa, is there something like that in your field?
For me, it's interesting. Star Wars has been an influence my whole life. I mean, I saw Star Wars in 1977 in the theater. And so for me, seeing that binary sunset, something that was so familiar, yet with that additional sun just looking so strange. For me, the environments in Star Wars have always asked, like, can those be real? And so things like Star Wars affected me at a very young age, because it made me start thinking about space in a way like, can those things be real? And so that's kind of why I chose my major in college.
And Angela, is there, obviously yours has the microbial that you already spoke about, but is there a way that Star Wars influenced you or any of the scientists you work with?
Yeah, so the whole premise of it, right, that there are all these different creatures and all these different planets, right? That's the job of an astrobiologist, is try to think of potential life and how it's surviving. And so does this help out? Yeah, totes. When we look at, these creatures, we're like, wait, how could that survive? Is there something like that on Earth? Yeah. So it is really cool. These concept designers are just intuitive about, what might help, for example, the exogorth hiding in rock, right? Or different little aspects of these creatures. It's always cool to read about and then try to relate back. Cool stuff.
Yeah. And I think one of the cool creatures that we see in The Force Awakens is the Lugga beast. It's the cybernetic beast of burden that the Tito is riding. Do you think that could work, like having the head of a creature basically encased, and so it can't eat or drink because it's basically kind of got a cybernetic head?
Right. Yeah. We'll go back to Jake's deep sea comment, right? There are a ton of crazy species down there. So there's a giant tube worm that was found to have no gut, no mouth, right? So how is it eating and what is it doing? But it does have, again, all these endosymbionts that are, absorbing hydrogen sulfide and then provide carbon and different byproducts for that rift or that tube worm to survive off of, right? So, again, little things like that, right? Like little concepts that were like, oh, does that happen? Yeah, that happens. Deep sea is another interesting place there for these types of creatures. Everything looks alien, right?
Everything looks alien. Speaking of Jakku, Lisa, we talked a little bit about, wreckage and debris from like Kessel coming down, striking Kessel. What about Jakku? What do you think the impact would be of all those ships dropping out of the sky during the Battle of Jakku? And then we see the wreckage in The Force Awakens. The largest ship, the big Superstar Destroyer, is maybe like 19 kilometers long. We could have a whole another panel on the length of Superstar Destroyers. But what do you think the impact would be to the planet from those impacts?
Exactly, right. It's all about the impacts. And so to give an example, the Chicxulub impact, that the one that we think precipitated the demise of the dinosaurs, that was from an impactor that's about the size of the Ravager, of that Superstar Destroyer that impacted Jakku. But on the other hand, an asteroid coming in is going to be going a lot faster. And so when you have something of the like a Superstar Destroyer, there's going to be some atmospheric drag. It's going to slow down. It's going to have parts break off. And so I think, I was trying to think about that. Like, what's the speed of them coming in? What is the density of the atmosphere on Jakku? Because all of those things actually would affect how much and how intact these objects are and with what speed they impact the ground. But Jakku had some craters. There's going to be some craters littering the ground. And I think, depending on the speed with which they impacted on it's a cold desert world. No, that's Jeddah, right? Jakku is a hot desert world. Yeah. I keep getting, with the soil on that makes a difference. Okay. But with the soil on the surface, I can imagine all those impacts kicking up debris into the atmosphere. And you can even get, climate change on worldwide levels. So it's, like I said, it's hard to know without all the details, but there's a lot of fun ways you can take it with how that would change the environment on Jakku.
And I certainly wondered that in The Rise of Skywalker, too, with the Death Star pieces there and those crazy tides that they show. Was it a normal planet before that fell out of the sky? Could something like that have tilted the planet enough to really affect the tides?
Maybe Jakku has already been affected, like you're saying with the water planet or whatever in the Rise of Skywalker. Maybe Jakku is a green and pleasant land and has been blighted by the falling spaceships. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it's a good point.
What do these battles really do? What do these space battles really do when they hit the ground like that? It actually is sort of an interesting, because that would have been large scale environmental impact in that case. In the Rise of Skywalker, I would still estimate that, for tides, you have to have another precipitating body whose gravitational pull is causing the tides on the world. So there has to be something else around that world in the Rise of Skywalker. What I would think would happen perhaps in that area, if you got chunks of the Dead Star in your sea right offshore, you have changed the shape of the underpinning shoreline that determines how the tides come in. And so I would think maybe that debris might have helped cause the tides to be a little bit wilder there.
It may have also, depending on how much of the debris of the Death Star landed on Kelbier, is that the name of the moon? Shifted the orbit, because it's also just a moon of Yavin, and so
Endor.
Yes, and Endor. I knew that.
Wrong Death Star.
Right.
One of the Death Stars. There's so many of them. I mean, really. They come up with a new name for once.
So clearly we could talk about this for hours on end, but unfortunately it is time to start wrapping up. I want to thank all our panelists for being here. I'm going to ask the one last question as we go around one more time of what science or technology from Star Wars do you wish was actually real? Again, I'll go first, but I admit I couldn't come up with something. Everything I came up with was more on the technology side, holograms, jetpacks, self-driving cars. And then I realized those already all exist. And I definitely want to explore whether or not those exist because of Star Wars. And now those kids grew up to be the designers of those exact products. James?
I think one of the technology that I would love to have exist from Star Wars are droids that I think, R2-D2, BB-8, there's just so much fun to have their characters unto themselves. Chopper from Star Wars Rebels. He's a great character. I don't know if I'd want to live with him. I'd be afraid that he'd try and kill me. But yeah, droids.
All right, Lisa?
Chopper's the best. For me, I would just like faster than light travel. And with that, faster than light communication, because if I'm going to fly to a galaxy far, far away, I would like to be able to communicate back to the people that I left behind what I discovered there.
Nice. Angela?
Carbonite freezing. That make me sound evil? It is pretty sweet. They really perfected it. I mean, we have a hard time preserving our samples here, and they've got it down. Also, interstellar travel, yes.
You found a positive use for carbonite freezing.
Yeah, it's efficient. They do a good job.
What about you, Jim?
I'd have to say, when you're looking at the science, especially as a geologist, we're looking at the planets themselves, and there's billions of planets in the solar system. So I'd have to also piggyback on hyperspace travel, because that's the only way we're going to get to any of them in anybody's lifetime.
Right, that's true. Well, I think that's something we talk about on one of our Star Warsologies episodes with an engineer or an electrical engineer is working towards ion engines, right? So one step in the process. What about you, Jake?
Is it repulsor lifts? The anti-grav stuff? Mm-hmm. Just like floating cars. Come on. Just no wheels. Let's just get rid of wheels and fly around.
How about you, Andrea?
Sorry. Yeah, that would be the same for me. I would love to see some hover bikes or hover cars. I think that would be amazing. Not just a hoverboard from Back to the Future. I want the full-on vehicle that we can use without the wheel. Awesome.
Yeah, as a traffic planner, I just cringe a little bit, because then people will just be driving everywhere. And, well, yes, you don't need roads everywhere, which would be good. But just, yeah, that there's a lot of chance for a lot more accidents and environmental destruction. And yeah, just imagine, your average driver. Now imagine them trying to navigate in 3 dimensions.
Yeah, as someone who lives in Southern California, that is a scary concept.
Speeder bike loop speeder level, just floating, nothing too high. I'll be happy with that.
Okay.
All right, great. Well, like I said, we could probably go on for hours, but we are out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us and our panelists, especially. We're recording this over Memorial Day weekend, so thanks for taking time out of your holidays and your various road trips to geek out with us. You can follow us all on social media, as well as the Fleet Science Center and the podcast Star Warsologies. That's Star Wars Ologies that James and I host. Jim and Angela, as I mentioned, have both been guests. Hopefully we'll have Lisa and Jake on at some point soon. And we've got lots of other ideas, and we came up with some more here today about STEM fields that intersect with Star Wars. There's psychology, linguistics, brewing, engineering. There's pretty much no limit to the possibilities. And make sure when you're in San Diego for Comic-Con next year to visit the Fleet Science Center. Back to you, Andrea.
Thank you, everybody. I want to give a big thanks again to James and Melissa, who put this together for us for the Fleet Science Center this year. They made the connections to the panelists. They came up with the topic. I just loved it. Thank you so very much. And yeah, I hope for the audience that we showed you that, yeah, pop culture is cool and science fiction is definitely awesome. But real life science also is super freaking fascinating and cool. We hope that you had some fun with this. You give science another thought as it connects to your everyday life. And yeah, that you visit us when you're in San Diego. We're in beautiful Balboa Park. And stay connected with us on social media. We'll have the links here at the end. And thank you, panelists, and Jake, for joining us from London and all your insights on the art process. I really loved it. I thought it was great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Comic-Con. I loved that discussion.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and having our different experts play back and forth really brought out lots of new ideas.
Yeah, I did not expect we were going to get to porg recipes, but I'm excited to follow up on that on a future episode of Star Warsologies.
Yes, very, very tasty. Yeah, so what are some of the things, where we're all here at home instead of at Comic-Con, what are some of the things that you miss most about going to Comic-Con in San Diego?
I miss pretty much everything about going to Comic-Con. It was always a big deal for me, one of my favorite times of year, seeing a bunch of friends and just planning my schedule around all these crazy things I was going to do, cool panels to get to see, running into friends I really only see at cons. And then, of course, walking the floor, buying way too much art and other things from the artist alley. I miss the whole experience. I miss taking it off work and just knowing that was all I was going to do for 4 to 5 days. How about you, James? What do you miss?
I definitely miss the chance to see friends that I only get to see, once a year. All coming to San Diego, getting to hang out with them in the evenings. That's the best part of Comic-Con for me. I miss all the cool Star Wars content that comes out and other cool content. And miss, just seeing the friends is the most important part.
Yeah. What I don't miss about Comic-Con is that it always managed to be the hottest weekend of the summer, no matter what time of year, whether it was the beginning or the end of July, it was always record-breaking heat. Last year, I couldn't believe it. When we were home, it was like gray and like 70 all that weekend. And I was, the one time you don't have to go stand in line for 4 hours.
Yeah, definitely being on your feet for standing in line, for walking the floor endlessly. That's pretty tough, but especially when you're outside for like the Hall H line and stuff. Definitely, I agree with you that for some reason, Comic-Con just brings the heat and humidity to San Diego. I think it's to let people know that you don't want to move to San Diego. You only want to visit.
Yeah, so I certainly like the at-home aspects of I can sit on my couch with the air conditioning on and pause whenever I want without having to go get a bathroom pass or anything like that. So I really like the aspects of San Diego Comic-Con at home. I'm very glad they did it again this year because I'm certainly not ready to get back in that packed convention center. But that being said, I'm really excited and hope we can do it next year. Well, we hope that if you come to Star Warsologies through this special Comic-Con episode, that you'll check out our archives. We've had 4 other episodes so far, and we've got a bunch more coming up. Our next episode is going to be with Dr. Drea Letamendi, and she's going to be talking with us about psychology. And I really enjoyed that discussion.
Yep, we're going to be talking with her about getting into kind of the mindsets of some of our favorite Star Wars characters, both good guys and bad guys, from looking at The Mandalorian to Rey and Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah, and I think my favorite part of the episode is how we talk about how Leia is the most well-adjusted, or maybe the only well-adjusted character in the entire series. So go Leia.
And if you do want to catch up on our old episodes, you might see some familiar faces there. Dr. Jim Lehane from the panel you just watched is on an episode we talked about Tatooine. And Angela Zaumplis is also on an episode with us talking about extreme life forms all across the galaxy, from the cold of Hoth to the space slugs in space to lava fleas on the hot planet of Mustafar.
Yeah, and we'll have Lisa Will coming up in a future episode later this year, so look out for more from her. We hope you'll join us as loyal Star Warsologies listeners. From now on, we are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can find a variety of other great shows. There's Collectopolis on YouTube, and then podcast Classic Marvel Star Wars Comics, the Neverland Clubhouse, Totally Tell Me Everything, and their flagship show, which is Skywalking Through Neverland. You can find all of that at skywalkingnetwork.com.
Got an idea for Star Warsologies, or you know an expert in their field that you think should be on the show? Let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at Star Warsologies, that's Star Wars OLOGIES @gmail.com. No topic is off limits, even the taxation of trade routes and outlining systems.
And if you listen to this episode as a podcast, check out our YouTube show, because for this one, we've got really great concept art, as well as just a fun Comic-Con experience. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.
And may the Force be with you.
Comic-Con! Woo!